thinking about food itself. Got it. Is thinking about food itself. And I taught a class at UConn called Food Culture and Society, and I'm going to take these first slides are going to come from that class, and it's a way I used to use to get the students to think about food and their relationship with food. And so I'm going to invite you to do the same here, to think about um, food and your relationship with food. So let me just share this screen here. There it is. And let's get it full screen. There we go. So this is our class today, Food is Culture. And these are the goals of the class that I've shared before. And if we're talking about food as culture, then it's the ones that I've highlighted. I think that we're going to be concentrating on to understand how our culture develops in the larger societal context that we have, and how things differ between us. And and as I said, we're going to focus on ourselves and see what we learn about ourselves in relation to food. So there's the first thing. Food is culture. Well, what is food? So I would invite you to think about what is that? Now, when I'm sharing my screen here, I can't see hands going up and stuff like that. So shout out what you think. What does this word mean to you? How would you define food? Unmute yourself and just tell me what it is from you.
Well, I think for me, back when I was a child, I would have said food is anything you eat. But now that so much of our food is so highly processed and so artificially enhanced and has so many ingredients in it that wouldn't be recognized in decades past as food.
Yes.
Um, I don't know. I guess I would have to say I really don't know what food is anymore, except it has to be something that you eat and it has to have some nutritional value, I guess would be a standard that I would add. But
Okay.
it's not as easy a question as it maybe used to be.
Somebody want to add to that?
This is Robin. You don't see me. I would see it as you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I would see it as something that provides nourishment to sustain living.
Okay, that sounds good. If you look it up in the dictionary, which of course I did, um, this is what it says. So we can have food for animals, we can have food for plants as well as for humans, maintain life and growth, a nutritious substance. A nutritious substance. I mean, we could now have a little discussion about what we mean by nutritious, because that's not an obvious definition as well. But let's take this and let's bear in mind what Linda said about how confusing it is now. And to try and unravel a little of that confusion, um, what about this? Is this food? Tell me yes or no, and why.
I wouldn't consider it food. I would consider it something edible. It's a drink because with food, it's something like that you eat, and with drinks, you drink them.
Okay, so you don't want to have drinks as part of food, but well, I'm going to differ with you there, because I'm going to extend my definition of food to include something that is liquid. So just because you drink it, I would like you to think about the fact that it might be food. So if you drink milk, most people would probably consider milk as food. So would you consider Coke Zero as food?
Sure.
I say
Like,
no because there's no nutrition.
there's no nutrition. Okay.
Yeah, and I
So-
think if you go by the definition that you posted from the Oxford English Dictionary,
Yes.
and it mentions the sustaining of life and growth,
Yes.
I don't think Coke Zero does that.
Well, it's
Okay.
fundamentally,
Anybody want to argue in favor of Coke Zero being food?
certainly I will. It's fundamentally water. And
Uh-huh.
certainly water is tremendously nutritious. We must have it. And I suppose that as much as we dislike the concept, that it is somewhat nutritious.
And it is the case that if you were to stop consuming anything by mouth, the first thing that would kill you would be a lack of water. You become dehydrated before you exhausted your energy reserves and died from that. So while water may be better than Coke Zero, we might think, or we might not think. I don't like the taste of the stuff myself, actually, so I would certainly think that. We might be able to consider this as food just because it's virtually, it's 99.9% water with some chemicals added. So it might be as just because of its water content. What about this? Is this food?
So Headley, this is Mike Callahan. I'll answer. I would say it's not food, but I'll also say I like them.
No, I'm confused by those two things together.
Right.
So
Well, if you look at the contents, the ingredient list of Twinkies, I would use Twinkies as a good indication of what is not nutritious food when my kids were younger.
so if you had if for whatever reason you've been locked in your basement for 3 weeks, or maybe that's a little too long, maybe 1 week, and you're really, really hungry, then would it be useful for you if there was nothing else for you to eat Twinkers? Probably it would, because it does contain calories. It does contain energy.
Mhm.
And so, it's that confusing term, nutritious. So anything that contains calories is giving energy to your body and supplying you with something, whether it's in the larger context, nutritious in the sense that it's good for your body, or something else. But from that perspective, it might be. Whether your diet should be based around Twinkers, I think clearly the answer is no. What about this? Is this food?
No, I would say no,
And why not?
because it's elements that are extracted potentially from food, if they all are,
Mhm.
but it's not the food itself. It's components of food.
So it's components. So it's and of course some people really concentrate on those components of food rather than the food itself, because that's the way you can make sure you're meeting all your individual nutrient requirements.
And I guess
Is
they're
this
called,
really food?
so they're called nutritional supplements.
Uh-huh.
But I'm questioning myself because we do extract components of food and add them to recipes, etc.
Yes, we do.
So it is something to reconsider in that sense. Is
But-
vitamin C food compared to an orange?
These are wonderful questions, and we don't have to come up with definite
I am on
answers.
iron supplement for anemia.
Yes, but is it food or is it a supplement? Is those two things different? Anyway, what about this? Would you eat lab-grown meat? Is that a good idea? We don't have to answer all these questions.
Well, generally, my understanding isn't, it's mostly plant-based cells that are grown and combined with chemicals. So it's supposed to be nutritious.
It is supposed to, and I bet it is. I bet it is nutritious. I bet it will give you many. I mean, that's the whole point. They're trying to make a product that is nutritious and supplies needed components to your body. Whether it's, whether that's a good way of going about it or not, or whether you want to include that in your list of food is something up to you. How about this? Is this food?
The one on the left or the one on the right?
Both. The one on the right is made from the one on the left. It's just
Got
giving
it.
you the full experience. I think the answer to this is yes, as long as you don't have celiac disease.
Mhm.
If you have celiac disease, this is poison. This is not food. This is an anti-nutrient. This is an anti-food if you've got celiac disease, because it's going to give you an inflamed gut that will then prevent you absorbing nutrients from other food. So it varies. It depends on the person. Corn corn is one of the American foods, i.e. it developed on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. It was taken to Europe a long time ago, and it's been incorporated into many European cultures. But in some places in Europe, this is just animal food. This is not what we eat. This is something you feed an animal. And then talking of animals, is this food?
Most
You don't
definitely.
mind eating animals.
I heard most definitely, and I didn't hear the other comment.
If you don't mind eating animals, it's
If you
food.
don't mind eating animals. And if you are not Muslim, and if you are not Jewish. Because if you are from either of those religions, this is not food. This is haram. This is banned. This is not kosher. And so, it's interesting looking at the history of this that we're not going to do now. But for some people, this is definitely not food. And then, I'd like to include this because George Bush the Elder would not eat broccoli. He did not think of broccoli as food. And actually, for some people who are sort of super bitter tasters, they have an enhanced ability to taste bitter compounds. This doesn't taste so good, and maybe he was like that. But anyway, that was him. This is a picture of one of the more interesting food shops in Hong Kong. And do you know what's inside there?
Dried meat or fish or something? I'm guessing.
Yes, that's all you can do. Unless you can read, if you read this label, there's a clue on this label, but of course none of us can read that label, right? It's not dried at all. It's absolutely live.
Yeah.
And this says danger, poison or something. That's what the Chinese characters say. So this is a shop in Hong Kong that sells snakes, and they keep them live because in Hong Kong, part of the food culture in China in general is that food should be fresh, and if you can buy an animal live, if that's possible, that's much better than buying one dead, because you don't know how long it's been dead and you can't tell as much about it. So these are poisonous snakes that you might not consider food, but people in China certainly do consider food. And of course, I had to consider it food, and so there's my snake soup that I'm eating.
And how did it taste?
Well, it's not remarkable. It's not a strong flavor. It's that so I mean, it's back to that cartoon where it says it tastes like chicken. So it's more like that than beef or pork that have more fiber to them. More, and by fiber I don't mean plant fiber. I mean muscular fibers. So not a strong taste, but you know, there's no reason why you shouldn't eat it. Why do we eat some animals and not others?
Yeah, it's arbitrary.
Why do we not? This. I didn't take this photograph. This is taken in the Philippines, but this isn't a food market, and this isn't a food market too.
Mm.
Starfish, scorpions, and then you know I was there this is in Beijing, and I was there with my sons, and so we had to try everything. Here's an interesting thing that probably not many of you have eaten. That is actually dog meat. So is that food?
Certainly.
And what if it was your dog?
I wouldn't eat my dog.
Yes.
But your point, of course, is around the world, people make use of every animal because they need to.
That's right. I mean, they maybe do not have the luxury. In general, these pictures are of things that maybe don't taste as good as many of the foods that we eat. But if you do not have an overabundance of food, if you do not have choices around it, then maybe these are good foods for you.
When you say they don't taste as good, you would mean maybe to us at first try, but locally they do to people who eat them regularly, or do you know
Well,
that?
I'm not. I didn't eat enough dog to pass judgment on the dog flavor actually, but things like these crunchy insects, the smaller things, they're you know, I don't think there's there's a lot of flavor to be gained from them. I mean, they were fine, but they weren't particularly interesting. This one, the most recent one that I put up, is interesting because it's sheep's penis, and so probably not too many of you have eaten sheep's penis or any sort of penis, because we have a cultural predilection for eating certain parts of the animal and not others. But again, if you don't have the luxury of an overabundant food supply, then we do not want to waste any of the animal, and therefore we should eat all parts of it. And it doesn't taste different from other parts of the animal, really. It's a muscular thing, and it's unremarkable. This was the only one we really didn't like. So I cannot recommend starfish to you. You could tell it came out of the sea, but that was very fibrous and dry. We did not manage to finish that starfish. This is food, or this is being sold in a market in Africa to people who don't have anything else to eat. So these are mud cakes.
Oh, wow.
And they're beautifully formed. There they are. They do not provide any nutritional benefit to the body. They may be anti-nutrients as well, in that they may pull things out of your body, but at least they fill your stomach. At least if you have the pain of hunger that is from just nothing to eat, they will fill your stomach. That's all you can say for them.
But did you label it?
Did I
Pica?
label
Well,
pica?
because some people crave such foods because of elements that they have in them that sometimes it is a nutrient like iron that's in there.
It may be, but in general, even if there is a nutrient like iron in there, it's almost always the case that you can't absorb it anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
going to be in a form that you're not going to get. So, whether they're people have looked for explanations for pica in many different ways. It's not just people that are desperately hungry.
Hmm.
It's also seen in this country with some people. It's described when in pregnant women, and people have hypothesized that it's because they're lacking something, and maybe it's in that non-food substance that they're trying to eat. But I just show it to extend the boundary of what food might be under some circumstance. Here's my favorite. What about this? Is this food?
Oh, fantastic.
Right.
It's taken some time ago. She doesn't look. I mean, she's 95 now, so or whatever it is. So, but is boogers food?
My nephew would say yes.
Yeah, right. And from a nutritional standpoint, you've got an argument. And what I would say is there's more in boogers than there is in Coke Zero.
But why is the body discharging it then?
I don't think it's. Why is the? Well, these are excretions from. I think the process of excretion is probably what's important. I'm not sure that it's trying to get rid of those things. It's not trying to get rid of those glycoproteins and immunoglobulins. It's just part of what's in there. There may be some other component that it's trying to get rid of, but those are useful proteins that can be broken down and used again. But anyway, it's not going to make a very complete diet unless you're very booger full. Anyway, so just to sum up then, food is that which I mean, Linda is exactly right. We could have ignored all this part. We just listened to Linda in the first place because she said it's what you eat, and it is what you eat, and we make judgments about it because what our definition of food is greatly influenced by culture and also by circumstance, because when our circumstances change, we are forced into eating other kinds of food. And so, what is the culture that determines what our food is? What is the culture surrounding us? And so that's really what we want to move on to. And before I do that, I should just show you this, because this is a great book if you want to read about, when I was thinking about this when I was developing the class for UConn, this is the book that I looked at and read. It's in the UConn library. It's probably not in your average, but I don't know if it's still in print or not. But it's a very interesting book. And so, how do we define food for ourselves? Where do we draw the line between what is food and what is not food? And we have to think about not only, I mean, we might decide that, okay, so that's food, but that's not food for me. So what is food for us? And why do we draw the lines where we do? And this, probably many of you have read this book. How many of you have read this book? Mary,
I think I've skimmed it. I've read other things by him, but I don't know that I've read that thoroughly.
Yeah. But anyway, so the omnivore's dilemma, what the omnivore's dilemma is what shall I have for dinner tonight? And this is really a book about American US food culture, i.e., what shall I have, in being from the United States, growing up in this country, in this culture, what on earth do we eat? As distinct from most other places in the world. Most other places in the world, which are not largely inhabited by colonizers, have an indigenous food culture that has developed over centuries. And this is a stupid question. We know what food is, we know what we eat, we know how we go about this thing. And it's only in the confusion of the culture of this country that we can lose sight of that. Of course, it's getting worse, i.e. the influences on US culture are being globalized, and so people elsewhere are also beginning to get this confusion. Michael Pollan's written many books, and this is another one that he wrote after The Omnivore's Dilemma. And this book can be summarized by saying, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. The next class, the last class in this series, we're going to talk about just food. So what is a rational way of approaching eating, and what might we actually do? And you could sort of, we could forget that class and just go with his 3 lines here, but we won't do that. But anyway, the reason I'm showing this now is because this book it's kind of interesting. It has a number of what I call Pollan's prescriptions, guidelines, simple guidelines about what you should eat and what does it make sense to eat and what does it not make sense to eat. And one of them is this. You could take a culture from anywhere across the world that's developed in place over time, and they have figured it out. They figured it out at a different time to the way we're trying to work now, despite the fact that, we live in this very wealthy place. The surrounding forces that determine our food availability and influence the way we might choose it lead us to be confused. So, you could just choose any of these places and you'd be better off than many people would in this country. And another one he has, which is relevant to this, is it's not because of that particular ingredient. It's not because they cook with olive oil or because they drink red wine or whatever individual thing you might want to think about. It's the package deal. It's more complex than any individual ingredient, so there's no magic bullet there. Okay, let me stop this share so I can see people again. Okay, so any thoughts about that? Any comments you'd like to make?
The only comment I'd like to make is what I consider normal meals has changed dramatically since I was a kid because of the foods my family ate. Once I got exposed to different foods, I made very different choices than the choices that my parents made.
Okay. Yep.
Another something, it's more of a statement that I have to say, like my like what food is to me, because I'm considered a very picky person, and so a lot of most American foods I don't eat. And like American stereotype for a picky person is like, oh, you would eat like chicken nuggets and fries. And during prom, me and my mom made my friends chicken nugget and fries, and I don't eat that. And so I ate oxtail. And so my friends were eating chicken nugget and fries, and I was eating oxtail. And like, so what food is like considered like American culturally is different than what food is to me.
Yes. So,
And those friends might not want to try the oxtail, right? So where's the pickiness, who's picky.
Right. So I mean, a couple of you have talked about growing up and what it was like growing up, and I think this is where, I mean, I think this is a really interesting thing, and where did things start? Um, and so what I want to do is divide us up into small breakout rooms, just to give you the opportunity to share what it was like growing up. What did you learn around food growing up in your family? What was it like? Did you sit down around the table to eat meals? What did you eat? What did you not eat? Was food a big deal? Was it not a big deal? Um, any aspect of your food culture that you would like to think about, because I think it's a really interesting thing to do and to interrogate in yourself. Where did these ideas come from? Where did my thinking about food originate? And maybe it's changed now, but how did it start out? And so I'm putting you in rooms now. I'm putting you in rooms with three people in. So some of you, there's two on a screen together, and so I'll put you with one other person. And the idea of doing this is just to give you the chance to talk with each other um, about um, about your food habits. And so maybe I'm going to assign. I'm going to put the. Let's see, it's 7 minutes past. I'm going to put. I'm going to put the room a 10-minute timer on the room, and then you can talk for 10 minutes. So you get about 3 minutes each, I guess. And then the room will close, and you'll come back, and we'll see where we are. So is that clear?
Yep.
I just one. Okay, one more to do, and then we're ready. Any questions about that? So most of you have got three in a room. Maybe there's one with two. And now I've got to do the timer. 10 minutes.
So the assignment is to talk about what,
To take it in
Food related.
turns, 3 minutes each, to talk about your memories of food as a child.
got it.
And how was it, what was it like? Was it a big deal? How did you shop for the whole experience of what you ate, where you got it from? Do you go shopping with your mother? You not go shopping with your mother, etc., etc. Okay? So I'm going to open, I've got them there. You got 10 minutes for your assignment. Okay, let's see if it works. welcome back. Any comments about that? How was that? Was that interesting? Did you think of things you hadn't thought of for a long time? Did you, there's nothing to say, plenty to say?
Plenty to say.
Plenty to say.
Yeah, super.
I mean, for the three of us who grew up in similar times, our experiences with food were very different.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? We do have some different age, different age range here, and I think, I'm aware of how enormously things have changed since the time when I was a child. Of course, I was growing up in a different country. I was growing up in England, so that's another element that is different. But I mean, if you think about, say, over the last 50 years, what are the things that have changed in terms of our food culture?
Well, one thing is that fresh foods of a wide variety are available all year round
Yes.
because stuff is from other parts of the country, but also imported from South America and other places. So we have a much wider variety of so-called fresh food available 12 months a year.
Yes, and it's not just all year round. It's also, there are plenty of foods around now that were not available to me at all. They didn't exist as far as I was concerned. They existed somewhere else in the world, but they didn't exist in the world of my food experience in England. And so the range is extended, and when you can get them has extended.
And I think the distance that food travels and the shelf life has also increased. And so there are a lot more additives, a lot more preservatives, a lot more things so food will last longer before it spoils.
Mm-hmm. So the food that is available to us, so it's not just, we talk about fresh foods, but also many more food products are available now that weren't there when I was growing up anyway.
And even what we consider fresh foods are often coated with stuff to help them be preserved. And
Yeah. And
A
what
lot more people eat out or get takeout as opposed to home cooking their food. I think,
Mhm.
when I was growing up, it was a rare treat to go to a restaurant, and there was no such thing as takeout. You went to a restaurant, you ate at the restaurant, that was it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of kids today, even though the family cooks at home, may think that the microwave is the traditional cooking technique,
Mm-hmm.
which means the food has been pre-prepared. It just needs to be heated.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about larger societal changes that impact the way you deal with food, but are not necessarily, are not just confined to the food area? I think about the role of women. So
Well, I would say that role of women, but linked to economic changes.
yes.
Because on the one hand, women have gained more opportunity to pursue things other than being homemakers, but
Yes.
it's also a necessity that both women and men work harder, longer. And so there's almost a bizarre contradiction in terms of women. But, the last decades, I mean, it's become necessary to have two incomes in one home if there are two adults with children. And even with two incomes, not enough money necessarily, but certainly it takes time away for the ability to cook at home.
Right. So both actually, in terms of time available to cook, both can operate in the same direction. So women have more opportunities outside of the home, and they are needed outside of the home to earn money, because you don't earn money inside of the home, and therefore, who's going to cook dinner?
Mhm.
I also think the mixed culture, marriages between people of very different cultures has happened
Uh-huh.
more and more and more, so that families have more culture, more food cultures that they're exposed to, and you get the mixture.
Hmm.
And as friendship groups, the same thing. You have the opportunity to meet people of different cultures that maybe when we were kids, we didn't have that opportunity.
Depending on where you grew up, right?
It's also interesting how for, for various reasons, partly because of sort of the influence of, fast food culture, partly because people aren't home to cook. And sometimes it's almost just the uh, personal tradition of a lot of people who do the cooking to not teach their children to cook. And I know people who are like from India who will say, my mother cooks so well, but she never taught me. So many people don't know how to cook for all different reasons.
Mhm.
And that changes a lot what they choose to eat when they're adults.
Right.
Mm.
There are a whole range of forces that are operating on us that are determining and limiting and sometimes extending how we eat and what we can eat and what our food culture is. I yesterday I got an email from the Lakota Law Project, and just contained within it is a crystal clear example of how our food culture can be impacted by by external circumstances. And so I'm just going to put this up on the screen so you can see it and read it. And what this relates to is the fact that their indigenous lifestyle was destroyed by the building of a dam,
Mm,
which took away their land.
mm.
And I just thought, she expressed it so well that I wanted to share it with you.
Yeah.
When they flooded our homelands, I can't see the next bit here. They took our land and the food grown upon it, and they replaced it all with a welfare state.
Mm.
It's
So
powerful.
stark.
So, so the food system that we end up in is very much dictated by the world that surrounds us. And as I was saying when I was talking about Michael Pollan, what we have in this country is a very bizarre conjunction of circumstances that that dictate our food culture now. And so I think it's worth just thinking about that together and following the food chain through some of the things we've already talked about in previous classes, and seeing how that determines our culture and seeing how that leads us to that place that Michael Pollan describes as saying, well, what on earth are we supposed to be eating now? So, for example, let's start with the agricultural. So, how do we grow food in this country?
Headley, could I interrupt with one previous thought on the previous topic?
Sure. Yeah.
And that is, I've become conscious over the last many years that now every possible combination of fat, salt, and sugar is prepackaged and available within arm's reach at almost every kind of checkout counter.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want that candy bar, it's right there.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably contributes to the health of America.
Well,
or lack
it
thereof.
certainly does, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. when we talk about how food is marketed. But let's just think first about how it's grown and how that might dictate, that might influence um, our attitudes and our thoughts about food.
Well, I would say
So-
large scale industrial farms for most of it.
That's right. The number of farms has gone down because they've got larger and larger. They're big industrial operations, and so we don't relate to that. There's no way. Most of the food is grown that way, and so where's our cozy relationship with a farmer? And of course, many of us probably go to the farmers market, and we are seeing often a new generation of farmers who we can build relationships with. But by and large, if you look at the country as a whole, most of our food is grown on big industrial farms that are sort of invisible to us. There's no way we can connect to that.
Not just the farmer, but flashing back to your slides about Hong Kong,
Mhm.
the act of eating, particularly, the meat from animals is a very sterile thing. No contact with how the leeks are grown, but also no contact with the whole process of the animal living, dying, and being processed to eat, which is very, very different from many places in the world where it's very real to people's lives.
The way that it's done by and large in this country, if you really understood what was going on there, you'd become a vegan overnight because it really is done in a very hard way that the intentionally is hidden from us. And that isn't, I mean, the way in which it done has gotten more and more extreme, I think, in this country. But actually, culturally speaking, I can remember, my wife Elizabeth being surprised coming to England and going to a butcher's shop and seeing a whole animal, seeing a rabbit hanging up there, maybe still with its fur on, seeing a whole chicken with its head on. When you buy meat in this country, it's meat. It's not an animal. It's as far removed from an animal as can be, in order that you don't think about, where that's come from. So, I think it particularly applies to the world of animals, because we may have thoughts and emotions about how they are being dealt with.
And I think you bring up a good point that we have thoughts and emotions because we have not been exposed.
Mhm.
I grew up in a farm family, and I have been instructed to go out and get the hatchet and catch a chicken and cut its head off, bring it in and dump it into boiling water and pick all the stinky feathers.
Mhm.
And so the thought of killing a chicken is less offensive to me, although probably after all these years, maybe my sense of disgust would have resurged. I don't know.
Mhm. I'm going to show you a video now, a short video. Again, it's something I used in my class at UConn. It comes from Africa. It comes from the Maasai people of East Africa, and here it is. And my students at UConn would often be upset by this, and I'm not. Let's see. Here it is.
This is a bleeding arrow that I tell you yesterday. They do have a bleeding arrow. This is for bleeding arrow. So now they just put the bow. Does it hurt? Not hurt. And the cow's still alive. I see. They take the blood and the cow still alive.
Oh,
Yeah.
why do they use arrow?
Because this one for bleeding arrow.
Okay.
Bleeding. Did you see for secured yesterday?
Yes.
That not like this one.
No, no,
This
different.
one different. Yeah, this for bleeding arrow. Double of that. Yeah, yeah. Double. Orang ya dulu kah? Cara begitu tuh. Mengenjok. Coba dagingnya. Jual lagi mau. Lah coba dulu kah? Ya, ya boleh. Ngaji. Orang mana berapa? Kamu sudah tahu lah. Gila lu. Enggak pernah asal garu. Lu dia orang kira gua asal gitu. Oh. Coba nasu.
How much blood?
That's 2 liters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is she going to survive?
Yeah, the cow still survive.
How do you stop the bleeding?
Well, let's say from 30 years, they're starting bleeding to get the blood. You know, before they don't have vegetables,
Yeah.
so they just have blood and milk. And now they just put us as free, and everybody can take a sip, and they can stay for a whole day without eating any food again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So it's very nutritious.
sure. Jaga betul deh.
That's a lot of blood.
That's a lot of blood.
Kanyu nana aja nih. Kita nak rabu lah hari. Una dua ragama, ayo lagi. So now they're going to stop it. Now the place that you know the place that
Check it.
so now they stop it and the blood still controlling.
How long do they have to leave that on?
Now.
Oh, that's it. Wow.
So what's your reaction to that?
I'm squeamish about blood, so I guess
You
Anyway.
are or you're not?
I am. I have a hard time even at the blood bank. I just have to think about
Uh-huh.
something. I turn white and they ask me if I'm okay. And it's just, yeah, I just want to get it over with.
So the
I be-
Maasai are they have a long-term. They've been living in East Africa probably for thousands of years, and they have their culture is based on cows, milk and blood, because
It's my belief
they're
that,
too valuable to be killed.
it's my belief that they have to drink it fairly quickly because within a few hours it will clog.
Yeah, I that makes sense. But so just think about how was that for you? Could you imagine? How does that compare to our dealing with animal products?
So for me, watching that, my undergrad is animal science. Animals have been a huge part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that as a very renewable, sustainable resource. We give blood and it renews. They're not killing that animal. They're maintaining their ability to have milk. So where our sensibilities may feel like, oh, that's terrible, I don't feel that. I feel like it's a very renewable resource and they're getting an enormous amount of nutrition from that animal. Whereas, industrial ag, we grow these animals up, we slaughter them, we eat a lot more meat than we need. We're devastating the environment doing so. And that to me seems like a very much more sustainable practice than what we're doing here, even though the thought of like drinking that animal's blood may not sit well with us. I get it and I respect it.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
I'm sorry. I guess I'll go. They said that the animal wasn't hurt, and so, oh God. So the animal wasn't hurt, and they can maintain the animal. And in Africa, I assume, unless they are more closer to water, which in most places in Africa are not, it's just a sustainable source. And also, like, they're maintaining the animal. These people have probably known this animal since it was born. And so, like, and they seemed to know what they were doing. And he even said, no, it doesn't hurt. And that's what they were doing. Doctors also do that with when like people lose a limb, like stopping blood flow. I can't really remember. So, and I've had that done to me kind of, and you don't really feel anything when that's happening. And so, like, the cow knows it's in an uncomfortable position, because a cow would know it's in an uncomfortable position. But I really do believe that the cow wasn't really hurt, and it was sustainable. And it's like, blood is such a nutritious source. Like, I've done a lot of research into blood recently. Blood is such a nutritious source, and you can do so much stuff with blood. It seems like a really good and healthy source for a place that doesn't probably have that much nutrition, because Africa is not a very nutritious area generally. And finding a nutritious source that is sustainable and really like healthy, it sounds like that's very intelligent of them. And I'm glad the animal, which I do believe wasn't actually hurt that much, because it is a cow, and 2 liters of blood, like, I'm pretty sure a human has like 2 gallons, and so it might be more, like, but I assume because a cow is such a larger animal than a human, and it's not losing that much blood for it to like be that hurt. That's probably like the same amount as like donating blood for us. So so it's just interesting, and I really appreciate that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I have a little bit of delay here, but a couple of people mentioned about the industrial farm, and even in the non-industrial farm in the European tradition is the whole animal is butchered. They may save the blood, they may save all the organs and everything else, but the whole animal is butchered. And that's even in a private personal farm where you know the animals personally and you have a small herd. The tradition is you butcher the animal and you use everything. And so that was a very interesting video to watch.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on because we're thinking about food culture. I'd just like to think a little bit about how food is made available to us. And some people talked about this a little bit before. When I was growing up, I really enjoyed going food shopping with my mother. I think that had a big influence on my life. We went to the grocery store where somebody stood behind a counter, and we told them what they wanted, and they went and they fetched it and they brought it to us. There were different counters in that grocery store that you because depending on what you wanted. We went to a separate butcher's, we went to a separate greengrocers, we went to a separate baker's, and this is how it's still done in a lot of parts of the world, but it's not how it's done in this country. So let's think about how food is made available to us and how that influences the food that we consume. So where do you buy your food?
We buy most of ours at the food co-op, so we do have some contact or knowledge of, some of where it's coming from. Not all, though. I mean, a lot, some off-season tomatoes are probably industrial farmed in Mexico or something, who knows,
And you also, at least theoretically, have some influence on what food is being sold there and how things are structured and so on and so forth. Because it is a cooperative and you are a member, and so that gives you some measure of influence. So the food co-op is, I think there's only 2 food co-ops in Connecticut. So most people do not buy their food at a food co-op. Most people buy their food at a supermarket.
We're supermarket people.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, maybe during the summer, a farmer's market, but
right.
For the most part, supermarket.
Right. I read an interesting chapter a few weeks ago about Piggly Wiggly supermarkets. Have you heard of Piggly Wiggly?
Yeah.
I had not heard of Piggly Wiggly.
Oh, if you go to Atlanta, they're all over the place.
There you go. And that's where they arose. I think they arose in Tennessee. That was maybe it was, I think it was Tennessee, yes. In the just before 1920. And it was a new concept. And the person that invented the concept was trying to save labor costs by putting the food on shelves and having people then serve themselves, rather than the way that I grew up, having somebody bring the food, serve me. And so it did reduce labor costs, and it was, it's taken over a lot of the world, that idea. But what does it do to the kind of food that's being sold? Most of the food in a supermarket is sitting on a shelf waiting for you to pick it off that shelf. What are the consequences of that?
It's prepackaged.
It's prepackaged, yes.
Often processed.
It's prepackaged, often processed, because you want it to sit on that shelf for a nice long time. You don't want to have to be throwing stuff away because nobody bought it. So the longer it will sit on that shelf, the better.
I think a lot of foods, especially unfortunately for children, the packaging itself, the pictures, the colors, where it's positioned on the shelves, the things that are at eye level, of course, are the things that are most profitable and are kind of being put forward so people will buy more of them. But I notice myself, even if I'm buying a salad dressing or something, I will be influenced by the pictures on the label. Mm-hmm. And if it looks like it's, some beautiful field that's being portrayed, I'll say, oh, that looks that looks really good. And if it says it's organic, I'm like, okay, this is better for me. I'll get this. And
Mhm.
maybe not the case at all.
Mhm.
I taught preschool in Wellington, and you would think kids in Wellington would be exposed to gardens and stuff, but the 3-year-olds had never seen potatoes. They didn't know tomatoes. They didn't know peaches and pears because they were just used to seeing French fries or tater tots
Mhm.
or canned fruit. And they had no idea what a potato was, and that French fries and that all come from some vegetable. It was amazing to me because I taught there for 20 years, and the whole time most of the kids could not name. They knew bananas, they knew grapes, they knew apples, and that was about it.
Mhm.
Wow.
So it's not only how it looks on the shelf, it's also the fact that you've seen it on the TV before you get to the store. There's a whole enormous advertising budget associated with foods in order to persuade you to buy that particular food. And because these products that sit on the shelves and want you to buy them um, are made by different corporations, and there's only so much food that you're going to buy. There's a lot of new products that are developed that are, creating some new market niche, trying to give themselves some advantage so that you buy that variety of processed food rather than the other variety of processed food. Food has to sell itself. Another one of the pollen prescriptions in defense of food is um, don't buy food that makes health claims.
Interesting.
And the reason behind that is carrots do not make health claims. Fresh produce does not make, fresh foods do not. They just sit there on the shelf, and some of them now do have branding, but by and large they sit there on the shelves, and you have to decide you want them. A processed food has to be sold. And we're selling it to Linda by labeling it organic and having a nice picture on the label, or saying that it's going to reduce your cholesterol, or it's light, or it's low cal, or whatever it might be. So if a food needs to make a health claim, it's probably because it is so nice. There are many other elements in it that are actually oppose good health. That we want you not to think about that, but just to think the fact that we reduce the fat in it by 10%. And so, yeah, there's been an evolution of the way that food is sold in this country, and the latest iteration, I don't remember when they built Walmart on the edge of Willimantic, how maybe it's 20 years ago or whatever, and that's a move as far as I'm concerned in the wrong direction, because it's big corporate, no local control of what's going on there. But we've now reached a new low, I think, in that there is a move. The VFW right next to Shop and Shop on Main Street has been sold, and they want to build another dollar store there. So dollar stores are the low point in terms of food marketing, as far as I'm concerned, because they have no fresh foods, and it's all processed foods, and there the selling point is cheapness.
And I think also even a step lower is in urban areas, it's convenience stores are where a lot of people buy their groceries, or if you want to call them groceries.
Right. Another pollen prescription is don't buy your food in the same place you get food for your car.
That's good.
And yes, so Willimantic has supermarkets, so we're doing all right for that. but many larger urban areas do not have supermarkets. They have small corner stores that have very limited range. They have a lot of fast food restaurants. And those areas have been termed food deserts, implying that there isn't any food available. A newer term has come up to describe them, and it's called food apartheid. Because it's not that there isn't food available in those places. There is food available. It's just different food. It's not healthy food, and so if you are a person of color, or if you are a person without any economic means living in that urban environment, you have a different kind of food made available to you than the wealthy people living in the suburbs. So I think food apartheid describes it pretty well.
You know, in Hartford, there were 13 supermarkets in 1968. And a few decades later, there was one. And West Hartford has 7. And it's half the population. And they're much wealthier, but in general, not everybody. And so the competition for price has got to drive prices down some.
Yes.
And there's the whole thing of the poor pay more. And it's very difficult for people to get to a supermarket when they don't have a car. So especially in the north end of Hartford, they're stuck with very little option.
I grew up in Hartford. I was like, the nearest stopping shop is like really close to me, and like that's where most of like I've actually never even been to like the most farmers market I've been to is an Aldi's, and so like in like near my aunt's house, there's like no like there's only like, as was said before, like Dollar Trees, and like there's only there, and like my aunt, like they have to drive so far away just to get like good food. And so I think it's like places that, even though they're not poor like in any sense, they built their own house there, like it's just places that are more expected to have house poverty are more likely to just not have anything good. Because now that I live in Bloomfield, like there's stuff everywhere. It's like, oh, there's the farmer's market over there, and like yeah, it's just different, and yeah.
Yeah. So let's just consider in the last few minutes so this is where we buy our food, and how do we prepare our food? And we've alluded to this already. How much time do we have to actually prepare our food? If I've got to work 2 jobs, or maybe more than 2 jobs, how much time do I have to prepare those nutritious meals, as distinct from buying fast food or buying processed food? So this is another element that I think is really important.
I think also that idea that some people never had the experience of cooking, nobody ever taught them to cook.
You have the skills.
And then I have friends that have time now, but they don't like to cook, and they know how, and they can cook good meals, but they get a lot of takeout because they just they don't enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I know people like that. And there's many Michael Pollan books, but there's another one that's just entitled Cooked, because he didn't know this guy who wrote all about the agricultural system and everything, and nutrition, and didn't actually know how to cook himself. He didn't grow up in that way. He was a man. He was, so then as an adult, as a famous journalist, he realized this, And because he was Michael Pollan, he could then travel the country essentially and learn from, barbecue masters in Tennessee how to how to do barbecue, etc., etc. And so that's what that book is about, different ways of cooking food. And one of the things he says in that book is that the most important thing that you could do to improve the food culture in the United States is to get people to cook real food for themselves.
Which means changing the economy so they have time to cook, right? Yeah.
And of course, it's one thing is cooking the food, and then there is also eating the food. And how do you do that? So do is it sitting down thoughtfully, quietly with other people or by yourself, but paying attention to what you're eating rather than rushing. Again, it's a big time influence. The culture of eating as well is really important for our health.
Yeah, I think another factor that influences a lot of families, especially with children, is that many families have children scheduled for lots of activities. So they're driving one person to football practice, and they're driving another person to a piano lesson, and they're driving another person to a ballet lesson. And so everybody's just eating in the car or grabbing something fast because they're going all over the place trying to have lessons and activities.
Right? It's another constraint on time. Talking of which, there is a constraint on time here. It is just after 8, so we should end. The next week, not next week, it's next month, but it's 4 weeks from now. We'll talk about a just food system. So what would a rational approach to this whole thing be? What are the elements we need to consider to figure that out, and what can we do to get as close as that as we can? So that's in 4 weeks' time. But any parting words here? Anything you would like to? Any comments from this evening's class?
Thank you. It was very interesting. Did have some thoughts, about it.
Thank you.
Great
Anybody else?
pictures and videos. I loved your pictures in Hong Kong. So cool.
I have got so many pictures from Hong Kong, Chelsea. If you want to see more pictures from Hong Kong, we could spend hours going through them.
Me too.
I think I would just like to say thank you, and also your reference to when people are working multiple jobs and time constraints. I think that's really important for us to all keep in the forefront of our mind around health equity and issues around cardiovascular disease and diabetes and childhood obesity, that a lot of times these kids are at home. They're at home and they're making food for their siblings, and it's about having fast access and easy, safe access to food. And they may be in an area of food apartheid. And I think there's so much judging happening around these issues of health equity. And we really need to keep that in the forefront of our mind, that some of us don't have to think about that. And we have access, we have close access, and we might have a bit more time than other people. So I really appreciate you talking about that issue of multiple jobs and a lack of time. So thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming, and hope to see you next month. there will be one more, well, maybe two more cultural cooking classes. There was supposed to be the African American cultural cooking class got cancelled at the last minute. The next cultural cooking class is in 2 weeks now, and it is featuring Native American foods. So maybe we'll see you there as well.
Thank you.
Thank
Heather.
you very much.
Thanks, Headley.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.